How does Apple Arcade compare to Google Play Pass?
And why are telcos desperate enough to give away free months of mobile access?
Vertical Hold is proudly sponsored by Casa Systems, taking Australian technology to the global market.
Welcome to Vertical Hold, Behind the Tech News, where we talk to Australia's leading technology journalists to get the stories behind the news of the week. I'm Alex Kidman, and rumours of Mini Godzilla and me going on an all-night retro game bender in Akihabara are totally without merit, I think. However, I have swapped places with Adam Turner this week. Last week I was in Japan, and this week it's his turn. But in his case, he's taking some well-earned family time off. He did leave me, however, this plastic-wrapped parcel with a handwritten sticker on it. Says emergency host on it. Just give me a second to tear it open. Oh, it's a purple-looking picker editor, Lee Stark. Adam really should have put air holes in that thing. Lee, are you okay?
Just give me a few minutes and I'll be fine. Thanks for letting me out. I'm glad to be here.
Lee will be sitting in a big, comfy guest host chair for the next 2 weeks while Adam's away. We're also joined by Finder Editor-in-Chief and a man who sounds suspiciously like me, I'm told, Angus Kidman.
G'day. Look, I've got to say, I think the purple look really suits Lee. He should form a Prince tribute band.
I don't even know how to respond to this. I don't have a symbol in my name yet. Do I?
Yeah, but you could. But I know that your set list could include "Baby I'm a Stark."
Oh God, you really are a Kidman. You really are a Kidman.
Wow, I wish I'd thought of that. And seeing as how you're feeling so creative, Gus, what's been grabbing your attention in the world of technology this week?
Well, one story that grabbed my attention was a relatively rare example of Google actually doing the right thing and behaving ethically. So this is a bit unexpected, I know.
A return to don't be evil.
Exactly, yes. There was an actual, sort of reduction in Google evil levels. So there's been a lot of controversy this year about virtual assistants and the fact that when you speak to those, that stuff gets recorded and sometimes it ends up getting transcribed by humans. And lots of people didn't realize this because they didn't read the conditions when they signed up for their Google Home, because no one ever does. But anyway, Google this week Google was already being relatively good because you had to opt in if it was actually going to keep your recordings and analyze them. But now they've committed to actually making it really clear that if you opt in to improve the quality of Google Home, it does mean that other people will actually be potentially listening to your conversations and transcribing bits of them. So they're sort of trying to cast themselves on the side of good. Apple does the same thing, whereas Amazon and Facebook, still you have to opt out if you don't want them to go through all your conversations. So I guess that's progress.
Are you saying you don't want people to listen to your requests of playing Prince and on Spotify, Gus?
Well, there are certain Prince songs that can't be mentioned, on a family podcast that, I'd probably rather people weren't thinking about.
Surely, I would have thought it's all those times, though, where you invoke those assistants accidentally, either because it just hears a similar sounding word or you actually say that word in some other context, realize, no, that's not what I meant, swear, and then tell it to stop that you don't want other people listening to.
Weirdly, the way you said that almost sounded like you're invoking the spirit of the devil or something.
Yes, that's definitely part of it. Google has also said it's going to try and wind back those accidental invocations so that people aren't going to have it happen quite so much. So, I guess that's also progress of a sort.
At the same time, though, I mean, they are playing around with improving the assistant. I know at I/O, for example, one of the things that got people really excited was the idea that you could simply say stop to it now, if you wanted to stop music or things like that. Obviously, that involves more listening again, though.
Yes, and it's really hard to strike the balance between if it works well, it's convenient, but it is that distinction between we don't seem to worry about some anonymous, unknown black box of a computer listening to stuff. We're a bit freaked out about another person doing it, even though they don't care. They're going to be sitting there doing this at slave wages possibly and just trying to get through their pile of things they're supposed to label. So I doubt they're really going to associate it with you. So I'm not sure that it's really a big practical problem, but it's one of those things about virtual assistants that just continues to freak people out.
Is it a question of maybe too much convenience? Like when they started rolling out the contextual stuff and people were saying, you no longer had to say, okay, Google, do this. Okay, Google, now do that. It just became a follow-on sort of thing. Do you think maybe it has to do with that?
Possibly, but I refuse to accept the idea of too much convenience because that's just not a world I want to live in.
So, Alex, there's a new arcade thing happening. It's apparently supposed to be fun. I'm told fun actually exists. What's going on?
Well, you say the words arcade to me, I start lighting 20-cent pieces up on arcade monitors, but it's actually not about that.
You've just come back from Japan. It's pachinko everything.
Well, those are 100 yen pieces, and
Right.
you're right. You're right, but I'm not going to talk about my ill-gotten pachinko gains here while the tax man is listening.
Huh.
Let's just put it that way. No, so last week Apple Arcade launched because the new iPhones arrived, and with it, Apple's subscription gaming service. And this week we've seen the emergence of Google Play Pass. Well, we've sort of seen the emergence, and it's more or less the same idea. And to give the listeners the quick wrap on this, these are subscription gaming services ostensibly for mobile devices, although in both cases they're going to go a little bit wider than that, especially for Apple, where it's a big ecosystem. You spend a fixed sum per month, you get access to a library of games. There's no in-app purchases, there's no advertising. In Apple's case, they're supporting the developers quite directly to make them exclusive. Google's taking a slightly different approach, though.
It's kind of like Netflix, but for games, basically.
Sort of, and there's already a couple of very similar models in market around this. I mean, Microsoft's got its Xbox Game Pass thing, which is Xbox and PC, and there's the Humble Bundle mod where they do a kind of subscription-based setup, although those games you actually get to keep, so that's a little bit different again. But yes, it's Netflix for games, broadly speaking.
And the library of games is actually kind of interesting because on the case of the iPhone, I've been playing with it this week, as I'm sure you have. On the case of the iPhone, not only do they jump across the iPhone to the iPad, they'll go to Apple TV later on as well, giving you a kind of like console experience. But some of those games are actually exclusives, as in they're not available. You can find them on Mac and PC, but you can't find them on Android, for instance.
Yeah, I think Apple's actually done a very good job here of curation. There does seem to be a little bit of something for everyone. So there are puzzle games and action games and deeply depressing role playing
Oh my
games.
god, the deeply depressing role playing game.
But it means that there's definitely a bit of a value proposition. It's a bit of a challenge, though, I think, for a market that's very much grown up around this idea of, well, actually, games should be really quite cheap because Apple Arcade in Australia is $7.99 a month. We don't know what Google Play Pass will be because it hasn't launched here yet. It's only launched in the States, but based on its US pricing, probably also about $8 a month. And this is a market where people go, oh, I'm not spending $1 on an app. Gus, do you reckon people like? Obviously, I'm a gamer. I'll probably jump at this stuff for a little bit anyway. But is it the kind of thing that might entice you?
No, I don't think it is. And where I think they'll have a problem getting it out to a broader audience is because of this notion of exclusivity and a fairly curated selection. Everyone's in the habit of using subscription services now, but we're used to the idea if you pay for something like Spotify, you get access to everything. Like, you've got lots of familiar titles. I think without having that well-known IP, those brands that people who aren't big gamers readily recognize, without having a lot of that in there, you kind of go, oh, there's nothing here that I'm necessarily engaged with. So for a casual gamer, it's like, yeah, maybe I'll just put up with the occasional ad rather than having to pay for something.
That's certainly true. That's certainly true on the Android side of things. I mean, Android games can invariably be free, but just supported by an ad. And I can certainly identify a lot of people who would happily put up with that ad to get the game for free.
Yeah, I mean, on the IP side, they do have some recognizable games. There are Frogger games in there. There's sequels to some really quite big indie games. So there's a Shantae platform game. There's a version of Enter the Gungeon, Exit the Gungeon, which I'm quite enjoying at the moment. So there are some known names, but I do know what you mean. This is actually not a bad point to pivot to where Google's moving on this, because it's almost a very classic Google versus Apple story. Apple is very tightly controlling and curating Apple Arcade for a selection of titles. Google has basically said, well, Google Play Pass will be both games and apps, but they can be things that are already in the Play Store. It's just that if they're in Play Pass, there's no ads, there's no IAP. So in fact, they're launching with a bunch of stuff that you can already get and people may already have as part of whatever they've bought through Google Play already.
Yeah, and I think that's interesting. I do wonder, I'd be crunching the numbers and going, well, do I want to pay $8 a month for a year, or for the half dozen apps I actually like, do I just buy those and then I've got lifetime access to them rather than having to keep paying all the time? Now I'm a bit of a freak like that. I'll do those numbers. Most people won't. They'll go, it's $8 a month. I'll just have it.
And that's actually a point that I wanted to make because in exploring the service, I found maybe 2 games I like so far that I would actually genuinely play. One of them is that very depressing apocalyptic title, which every time my character dies, I'm like, God, I'm going to have to start again. However, I'm still obsessed with it, so it's a thing. My point is though that paying $8 a month for a game that probably would cost $8 in total, if it were released by itself, is something I'm not sure I can really get into. I don't mind having the library of games there, but if I'm honest, if I'm only going to play one or two, paying $8 a month is going to get very costly for a game that doesn't actually account for that in the long run for me.
I suppose the thing is, and where this is going to be really interesting, is this offers a way for app developers to make money. I mean, Apple is quite openly for Apple Arcade saying, yes, we're funding the development of these games. Google, I believe, is looking into more of a kind of revenue sharing model because obviously a lot of these titles already exist and may coexist between Play Pass and not Play Pass. But it opens up an opportunity for developers who, let's face it, have to eat to move away from that kind of hideous in-app purchase model where they might have the seeds of a decent or interesting game there, but you play for about 3 minutes and suddenly it says, you need more Smurf berries. They're only $14 for 1,000.
It does help get rid of that. I mean, that has been a model that some developers have worked very successfully with, and they'll acknowledge that only a very small percentage of people ever actually have to buy into it to make it profitable. So it's got possibilities. I really wonder if this might not get disrupted eventually if Amazon decides to get into it, which of course has its own app store and thing, because Amazon has really gone for the model with Prime of you get everything. You get music and you get delivery and you get TV and you get all these things. I wonder if Google might do something similar or Apple might do something similar. And ultimately you'll have the one sub, which is a bit of music, a bit of games, a bit of everything, rather than these 3 distinct channels.
It would be nice.
Google's already... Sorry, Lee, you go ahead.
I was going to say, it'd be nice if the Apple Family account for Apple Music started bundling that sort of thing inside of it, because you already get quite a bargain if you go for one of the family accounts on the music services, 18 odd bucks for 6 accounts. It's actually not bad. But if it started bundling things like a gaming service, like a media service, like Apple TV Plus is a good example of that, then it starts to become way more interesting.
Well, I was going to say Google's almost kind of halfway housing that because where Apple Arcade is just games, and if you're not interested in games, there's no point in even looking at it. Google's Play Pass is going to be games and apps. And there's really only a handful of apps that people seem to know about already, and some of them are like weather apps and things like that, which you may or may not be interested in getting. But it does open up this possibility of having a wider array of things, although I suspect that's also because Google's Play is less of a whole ecosystem. Eventually, you'll be able to do Apple Arcade on pretty much everything Apple, and you tie that into the fact that the new versions of iOS and iPadOS will support PlayStation 4 and Xbox One controllers, and you've actually got quite a robust little gaming solution there. Google doesn't really have that. I believe Play Pass will work with the NVIDIA Shield TV if the apps exist for that format. It's not quite as kind of clean and it's not across as many devices, so it's maybe not as convenient for people.
I just want to get back to that Sony phone that had PlayStation controller buttons on it.
That thing was horrible.
It had an it had an optical joystick. Why don't you just rely on the N gauge? That was a mobile console.
That was a mobile something.
It was definitely a something. So I've heard that I'm allowed to be stingier these days. I don't actually have to pay as much money for my mobile account because if I jump to a new telco or even an old telco I'm not really familiar with, I might actually get some free months with them. How does this work?
Yeah, so this is the latest kind of promotional tactic that we're seeing out of Optus. And in fact, a new entrant into the local telco space, a mob called Circles.life, who are actually running on the Optus network, but that's not all that surprising.
That's a really weird name, though.
Virtually everybody in the MVNO space is running on Optus. There's a handful of Telstra and an even smaller handful of Vodafone.
That's a thimbleful for Vodafone.
Yeah, exactly. we'll do Circles.life first. They launched, and their big promotional blitz thing is that you can try their service, which is postpaid, but it's month by month for 4 months for nothing. Basically,
Not bad.
they're happy for you to trial their service with, I believe it's a 20 gig plan off the top of my head, and the usual unlimited standard local calls and texts kind of deal. It's obviously a big, aggressive play into the local market. Meanwhile, Optus, who obviously own the network that Circles.life is running on, has launched its own promotion for 3 free months on a plan. But this one has a slight quirk to it.
What's the catch?
So the catch is in this case that you only qualify for the 3 free months if you're in regional Australia. In fact, Optus branded this as Freeginal. So somebody is going to get roasted for that one. But the idea is, so if you're not in a capital city, you can potentially get 3 months free, not on the full range of Optus plans, on a decent sub-selection of them. So again, a similar kind of offer, but with a more restricted profile of people who can take it up.
And these are just the plans. They're not going to give you a phone for 3 months free as well, are they?
No, some of the plans that are incorporated do potentially have, but there are some that include a handset. So if you found one that was a zero payment, I think you probably would get those 3 months for free. So, but of course, most if you find a phone with zero payment, it's not going to be
a particularly great phone,
new or particularly shiny or particularly exciting. So, and I tested this. You can work out if you qualify. You just go and put your postcode in, to see if you get that, and it doesn't just cover, like I put in the names of some very small, weird towns like Blanchetown, and that one qualified, but bigger places like Dubbo also qualifies. So,
right.
It's an interesting move. But I think the big problem with the Optus approach in particular is that long experience of chatting to people in regional areas tells me that they still have a really strong Telstra bias, a belief that Telstra is the only network that's actually going to work in those remote areas. That's not always borne out by reality, but the perception is there. And so maybe this three months is really as much about that, about trying to get a few people to sample it, discover, hey, actually, the coverage here is not so bad.
I mean, that's the question, though. I mean, you could get the 3 months on Optus in rural Australia. Is the coverage actually going to be usable? When I used to live in Bondi, theoretically, the coverage of telcos there should be
not
great.
Rural Australia.
I'm aware of that. Well, it's rural. It's rural if you're not. No, it's not. I can't spin this anyway. I'm not good enough to spin this. But my point was that there was a part of Bondi I lived in that was basically a Faraday cage, and so it didn't matter who you were with. If you were living with my dad, which at the time I was a kid, but if you were living there, despite the fact that you were in the city, you still couldn't actually get access. I mean, is this going to be a case of someone joins for the 3 months and doesn't actually get access in rural Australia?
Well, this is presumably the idea of it. Now, they do actually have a kind of service guarantee thing where they basically say, look, if you're not happy with the service that you're getting, you can walk away anyway. But this is basically the idea. You will pay them nothing for the 3 months, work out whether or not the service works for you where you are. I think to Gus's point about people in regional areas having a bias towards Telstra, there's a lot of historical evidence. There were points in time where that was absolutely the case. There were plenty of even quite large regional centres where, in fact, it was Telstra or nothing. There just wasn't any coverage from Optus at all, and Vodafone for that matter. I think that has definitively improved over time. And this is a fairly bold play from Optus to get a bit of interest out of those markets. Although I do wonder how generous a deal that really is, because if you look at Australia demographically, we all tend to cluster around the East Coast, and an awful lot of us tend to cluster in the big cities where this deal doesn't apply.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think the interesting thing, if you look more broadly at this trend, this notion that, hey, we're starting to give all this stuff away, it's because product differentiation for mobile plans is so hard now. Because the reality is that everybody has unlimited calls and text Australian numbers. Yep. So there's nothing to distinguish you there. And these days, for most, unless you're an absolute YouTube watching junkie, there are plenty of plans out there that are sub $30 a month that will give people everything they need. At sub $30 a month, 3 months, so it's great. That's $90 you've saved. But for a lot of people, that's not going to be worth the switch. So this is what I think they're having to try, because it's getting very, very hard to distinguish your product out there. That's a good thing from a consumer point of view, because it means there's lots of value to be had. But it's kind of nasty if you're trying to run a mobile network, because how on earth do you attract more customers? Because pretty much everything looks the same.
But is there also a problem with the idea of something, being free, being good? I mean, not no disrespect to either Optus or Circles.life, but which is a really bad name. I'm sorry. But when I hear that something is free, I mean, it's a nice idea to get something for free, But kind of like how, Apple just continues pushing out phones that are very high price or price in general comes with a feeling that, it might be worth that. Does the idea of it being free diminish the quality?
Well, I think the problem they've got is kind of twofold. I mean, for Circles Not Life, they're a new brand in a very saturated market.
Mm.
There's lots of little MVNOs. As I said before, most of them are an Optus, so they're all basically competing within the same coverage and broadly the same kind of price points. There's not a lot of premium players on that network to
No.
speak of. They're all pretty much value centric. So they kind of need to make that splash. It's also worth, I will say this, it's also worth if you are tempted, have a look at their CIS statement, the information summary statement that they're obliged to provide, because there are a few little hooks. Not so much in the 4 free months, they're still giving you that for free. But if you decided to stay with them, and we know a lot of people fall victim to the lazy tax where they just stay on the same telco, because they're postpaid, so there is an additional data charge if you go over your quota. They say they'll gift you 3 gig for free on top of your quota if you do go over, which is quite nice and generous again.
Mm.
But after that, unless you prepay for additional data because you work out you're going to need it, it's all charged on a per megabyte basis. And again, if you're a YouTube or a Netflix junkie, that could lead to a pretty hefty bill.
And it's a very 5 years ago approach where most others have moved to a standard $10 for a gig, which has pluses and minuses. But on the whole, if you're an excessive user, I think it's a slightly safer model.
I think the other thing there as well is this is very reactive to what Telstra did a couple of months ago, where it basically said, look, our postpaid plans are all effectively unlimited. And I know they have, very technical ACCC keeping happy
on ADSL
names.
speed.
Yes, you do get. Oh yeah, you do get downgraded in speed. But the point is, they're basically saying, look, we're not really selling data anymore.
Yeah,
we're selling access, and they bump their plan quotas up. It makes it a bit harder for those other players to compete at that level, and perhaps that's why free has that appeal right now, or at least I guess that's why they think it does at a marketing level. Well, that's just about it for another episode of Vertical Hold. Now, Lee, if folks want to track you down on social media or online, where can they find you?
You can find me at Lilo, Leighlo, or online at pickr.com.au.
And Angus, same question.
So you can find me on the Twitter at GusWorldAU, and that links out to anywhere else that you might want to see me.
And of course, we're always keen to hear your feedback at Vertical Hold. Are you too busy playing Apple Arcade to listen to what I'm saying right now? Keen to sign up for a free mobile plan? Let us know via Twitter, that's at Vertical Hold AU, or the Vertical Hold Facebook page. Thanks to Angus for joining us for the show.
It's always a pleasure.
And thanks to Lee for being the virtual Adam this week.
I like being virtual Adam. It's kind of comfy.
And thanks, as always, to everyone who tuned in on your podcasting platform of choice. It's usually Adam's job to bang on about it, but we really do appreciate all your shout-outs and reviews.
Vertical Hold is proudly sponsored by Casa Systems, taking Australian technology to the global market.
So my plans for a subscription Engage service have just taken a severe blow.